Well, the budget deal is done. Healthcare is on the docket, and North Korea is acting up. We'll discuss all that and more with Democratic New York Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney. And President Trump, he's pushing for a healthcare vote. He says he wants one this week, but the question is, do they have the vote this time around, or will this be yet another debacle? And the president is ratcheting up his attacks on, you guessed it, the media. Is that a war, though, he can win? Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us this Monday night. Well, the second 100 days, they have started, and there's a lot of second guessing going on in Washington. President Trump, he's pointing the finger of blame squarely at Democrats for stifling his agenda. Take a listen.
These are the people, the great obstructionists. Look where the Democrats have ended up. Hey, John, they had everything going. Now they don't have the presidency, they don't have the House, they don't have the Senate, and Schumer's going around making a fool out of himself.
We'll talk about that in a second, but also listen to this. This is the House Democratic leader, Nancy Pelosi, not too thrilled with the president. Let's take a listen just how far she would go to have somebody else in the Oval Office.
Either we win or whoever wins understands the priorities of the American people, and they are not what President Bush, excuse me, I'm so sorry, Trump. President Bush. I never thought I'd pray for the day that you were president again, but...
You're praying for the day that President Bush is president
yes,
again?
Well, we worked, and so you asked the question, how would I work with a Republican president? The way we worked with President Bush.
But both sides, they were actually to hammer out a deal here on the budget that at least funds the government through September. The deal done, but it doesn't include money for the border wall that, remember, our friends south of the border were supposed to be paying for. But it does include more money for defense and border security. With so much going on in Washington, as well as around the globe, it is good to speak to Congressman from New York, Democrat Sean Patrick Maloney. He's kind enough to give us some time. Congressman, thank you. I know you're jammed on your way to D.C., but first off, do you share those sentiments? I know you weren't there during the Bush years, but nonetheless, have things gotten so bad that you'll take anybody over this existing commander-in-chief?
Well, I think what the leader was trying to say is that there is a model here where you can work across the aisle in the early days of a presidency to get big stuff done. Look, there's only a few things we need to do, right? We need to get our fiscal house in order, our debt and our deficit. We need to reform our tax code. We need to fix what's wrong with the Affordable Care Act, but keep what's working. We need to reform a broken immigration system, and we must invest in our own infrastructure. And all of those things can be done in a bipartisan way. Unfortunately, the approach the president has taken and the extraneous things he has engaged in, from making wild accusations about President Obama, wiretapping and whatnot, or the Muslim ban, or attacks on our free press or our judiciary, have so distracted and enraged and roiled the waters. That's very hard to work across the aisle. Some of us really want to work with him to get those big things done, and we need to do it now because the president will discover that his capacity to govern is getting weaker, not stronger.
Well, to be fair, the president doesn't even need you. When I say you, the Democrats in the House and the Senate, as he just said in that clip, he's got the majorities there. I'm curious, I'm hearing from Republicans, they're confident finally Trump Care 2.0 will pass the House, but the dirty secret is, yes, pre-existing conditions are there, but they're leaving it to the states if they want to opt out at any point. How much of that of a non-starter is that going to be for Republicans in the House and probably the Senate? Are you worried what might get through on a party line vote might become law?
There are things you can do when you have both houses of Congress and the presidency. And so, this notion that the Democrats are obstructing them is sort of silly. If they all agreed with each other, they could do a lot. But of course, as a practical matter, if you don't have 60 votes in the Senate, and you don't have some Democrats supporting you in the House, because of course you always lose some of your own guys, and where they have a number of members in their own party who are so extreme that they won't support the team on anything, then you do need to work across the aisle, because look at the results of the first 100 days. This has been the least productive 100 days of any presidency since at least before the Depression, and that is for a reason. It is because the president has taken this extreme course of action on things that have so divided the political parties that no Democrat can be seen in the same room with a guy. And I'm in a district that voted for him. I would love to work with him on lowering prescription drug prices, on investing in infrastructure, on reforming the tax code. We can lower the rates and we can make it simpler and fairer.
Let me talk about infrastructure. You sit on the infrastructure committee. anybody knows it comes through Penn Station is just one example of many, just how much of a mess we're dealing with. It was believed, Congressman, before he even took the oath of office, that there was a deal to be had on infrastructure. But if you went across the aisle and worked with this president on infrastructure, I got to imagine that they'd be held to play politically, given how toxic of an environment and how unpopular it is.
I'd do it tomorrow. I'd do it tomorrow. And I have worked across the aisle for several years now in Congress on things like getting our grade crossings safer for our Metro North trains, on making sure we don't have these derailments that have taken the lives of our neighbors, and a lot of other things. We did pass a $300 billion infrastructure bill last fall in a bipartisan fashion. That is a 10% increase for our roads and bridges here in New York. By the way, we're finally getting all of 684 resurfaced. You know, I did that working across the aisle, and I want to thank the governor for his leadership on that. But I would gladly take the political heat on things like prescription drug prices. We've got to get them lower. On things like fixing what's wrong with the Affordable Care Act. There are things we can and should do. And on things like infrastructure, my goodness, we can do that across the aisle. And if there's a political price, well, I was sent to Washington to get things done. And I'm happy to go back to the voters and say, maybe you don't like everything, or maybe you don't like Donald Trump, but we have a responsibility to work together. I want this president to settle down, stop tweeting, and call up a few of us who want to work in a bipartisan way and get some points on the board.
Well, you just came back from a trip to the Far East, including in Korea. I want to play for you a clip of what President Trump had to say when asked about the North Korea missile test and what our plans to do. Here it is.
I just don't want to discuss it. And I think you know me very well, where you've asked me many times over the last couple of years about military. I said we shouldn't be announcing we're going into Mosul. I said we shouldn't be announcing all our moves. It is a chess game. I just don't want people to know what my thinking is.
Is a preemptive strike really on the table right now? I mean, what do our allies in Korea or Japan have to say? Is that a card that's bluster, or is it real?
It's an extremely serious situation. I just spent a week in Japan and South Korea, including a trip to the demilitarized zone. I can tell you I met personally with the Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe. I met with the South Korean Foreign Minister, with our four-star General Vincent Brooks, who commands all U.S. Forces Korea, and the former Ambassador Chris Hill was with me on the trip, who conducted the six-party talks in Beijing under the Bush administration. We got a full briefing of these issues. Let me tell you what. The consequences of the retaliation for any U.S. military action are so extreme on South Korea and Japan, where, by the way, in total we have about 70,000 American servicemen and women. We also have about 300,000 Americans just living in the artillery range of the North Koreans in Seoul and in that part of South Korea. So the consequences of an exchange of hostilities could be absolutely catastrophic. But I will tell you, I give the president credit for keeping the option on the table, because the North Koreans are developing an ICBM capability for their nuclear arsenal. That is an extraordinary threat that we have never faced before. And we have to keep all options on the table. Now, I'm comforted by the fact that when you look at people like General McMaster, who is now the National Security Advisor, or General Mattis, who is now the Defense Secretary, and the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, I believe these are very experienced, intelligent people. They aren't necessarily the people I would have picked, but I'll tell you what, these are capable guys. I hope the president listens to them. This is a serious situation. We cannot be doing this by tweet or by bombast. We have to have a real policy. But I give them credit for holding their feet to the fire, and by understanding, and this is critical, the role that China must play in containing this threat and rolling it back.
Last question. The first 100 days have been stunning in the volume of unprecedented language, dialogue, dysfunction that we've seen in Washington. The polls seem to bear it out. The public's not too happy. Do you think lessons have been learned by this administration, and the next 100 days will be more productive? Or even from what we heard this weekend, should we expect more of the same?
The president cannot be productive on Capitol Hill, by definition, until he reaches out to Chuck Schumer and a couple of Democrats in the House and says, how does this work for you? What can we do for the country that's good, that we can all agree on? This course of action, even if it gets some bills passed in the House, will result in gridlock in the Senate. So he's running down a blind alley here, and I don't take any pleasure in it. I don't care to see this president waste the window of his greatest power when he could be, in a bipartisan fashion, creating jobs, investing in our infrastructure, lowering drug prices, reforming our tax code, and doing a few other things that we must do, like reforming our immigration system, supporting our schools, supporting basic research, and getting our fiscal house in order as we do things like tax reform. We'll work with him on all that. I will. But it is absolutely necessary that he understand that is his path to success over the long term. So until you see him, talking to Chuck Schumer about how to get a few Democrats in the Senate on a bipartisan approach, I'm afraid you're going to see the same thing in the second 100 days until he changes course.
So, fake tears, Chuck, probably not his best course of action. Hey, I wish you the best of luck in Washington. Sounds like you'll need it. Thank you. Coming up next, healthcare is back on the agenda, as you just heard, and the White House is pushing for a House vote this week. Our panel will join us to debate whether they have those votes and whether it's a good political move.